Welcome back. Denny Johnson here. And I'm going to continue the process of how to apply RAYID. I gave you a little history, personal stuff about the background, how the RAYID iris came, a little bit of the birth order function. And today I want to take you through 3 different places if we have time. And none of this is designed to be complete. It's just, as you know, not possible to cover all of the information thoroughly in a few hours. But I want to give you those things that are the most useful to me and are consistent over the last 30 or 40 years of doing iris. What things actually help me do the job? So we got into last time a little bit of constitutions, and I explained the importance of jewel and flower. And these two long-term opposites, they are consistent. And whenever I'm doing a consultation and I'm trying to recognize, am I dealing with a jewel or am I dealing with a flower? And you'll see that there are very definitive jewel-like characteristics about how they interrupt or they talk or they want to tell you or explain something. Flowers typically have a tendency to listen first, even if they space out. They may not remember your name later, but they space out, or there are certain attributes, and there are attributes of jewel and flower about how they relate. Now, the reason I'm trying to identify their constitutional pattern is that the constitutional pattern has a progression of steps, 3s. I use 3s everywhere within the work, and I found it to be very useful. So whenever I think of a flower, for example, if I identify a flower, I know I'm going to need to explain their life in terms of 3 degrees of being a flower. That later on becomes 3 stages of life that's important for them to be aware of. Or later you'll see also how the birth order pattern that many of you have already learned, that if you have a 1 girl, she has a lesson as a 1 girl, a 3 girl, and a 5, and it comes in 3 stages of life. So I do my best to try to identify the constitution and which one of these lines that they're on and what step of the 3. I know that sounds like a lot. When I say what line, I used to say, well, what's the vector? Well, that was a scientific term describing direction and velocity. So where are we headed? Well, you'll find out that flowers have a tendency to be headed in one direction. Jewels have a tendency to be headed in another direction. And then they have relationships with each other that may or may not work in the short or long term, but they have a pathway, they have a compulsion. And then you'll find out if you have, for example, those of you who know the birth order, if you have a number 2 behind a boy called a 2 boy, and they're a flower, you know that they have 2 boy, 4 boy, 6 boy kind of lessons to learn. If it's a 1 boy and you know they're a jewel, they have a 1 boy, 3 boy, 5 boy series of lessons to learn. So I like to identify those lessons, but I always like to start with what I used to call 3 yes answers. This is how I do it. If you know you have a jewel, because you looked at the constitution or you noticed it in the behavior, I go, you have a wonderful mind. Keep it, use it, but for just a few minutes, what I'd like you to do is just listen and let me explain what I see about how you use this mind. So I also got a yes answer in my own head that they nod, that they understand, look, you have a brilliant intellectual desire to understand and to seek. And you have a tendency to want to verbally communicate to other people what it is that you understand. You want people to listen to you. And if you did that right, you got 3 yes answers, because the ideal situation is that you explain who they are and they say nothing. Mostly what I do with a consultation now, jewel or flower, I say, look, other than a couple of questions I'll ask you about your birth order or maybe some symptoms you're going through. That's just all I'm going to do is just give you some basic questions, but for 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, what I prefer is that you say nothing. I just want to objectively describe based on my own observation, because you know I don't know you or your family or your mate. I'd like to describe the pattern to you. So I usually like to start with the birth order pattern first. So I have a whiteboard and I draw their family. I draw one side to the left, I draw that in red, because that indicates the father's family or the outside. I draw the other side in the birth order patterns of the mother's family in blue. So it's the blue from the mother, the red from the father, and I describe their birth order and the birth order of their children. Now, if you have any practice at all in the birth order, you can describe, say for an example, number one girl. It would do well for you to understand it and apply it. Number one girls are typically connected to father's family. And they will usually answer that easily. They'll nod their head or whatever. Typically, number one girls are connected to father's family. That's father's mother. So I draw a line over to father and then father's mother. But it continues on up to father's mother's mother by passing through one other stage in life. So I want to describe for her as a number one girl, what does that act like and feel like to be a number one girl doing the domestic experience of family, and then applying that to the three girl location, which means now she's going to do the same thing in the community. Then later in life, she'll go from, if she makes it there, she goes later from three girl community function to wanting to do it on a five girl level, which is usually animal kingdom, and or wanting to do something global or wanting to do something compassionate. That's typically the journey of a number one girl. This is how she moves, 1, 3, 5. So I described that to her in basic terms and saying, we're going to come back to that sequence and how each part of this sequence is really determined by the choices you make. And I would like you to see the opportunity to make these choices in a healthy way. So that's the first part, is I like to get those yes answers. And then I like to say, oh, you have 2 sons. And then you can describe how close it is to be the number one son. And 95% of the time, they see how their number one son is so close to them, even more so than their husband, which is genetically true because their number one son has half of her DNA. And not only does he connect to her better than his father, he's also connected up to her father, because number one son connects up to mother's father. So this lineage of number one son, very easy to confirm, very easy for him to realize if he's sitting there. So you can go through this, and we've not even yet looked at the iris. Then you can describe number two son. And you know that's father's line, a completely different personality pattern, emotional fire, very physical body, needs dad, challenges the mother. Now, if you trust the birth order system, I can assure you it works. You just have to apply it. But also recognize that the application of the birth order is not going to be honestly displayed about 20% of the time. Meaning that either people don't want you to know they had a stillborn child, or the father had an affair somewhere, had a child. Scientifically, it's been shown that about 20% of the children who believe their biological father is theirs, it's not true. So then there comes some confusion when it comes into understanding the child versus their position in the family. You thought you had a number two son, but it actually turns out to be a number three. And so your ability to be able to guide those children is going to be dependent on your skills when maybe even the mother, and in some cases not even the father, knows he conceived a child somewhere else. A basic thing to you, trust the system. Now, one of the ways that you use the system is looking at the body types. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a very basic explanation of the body types for 6 girls and 6 boys and their association to different parts of the family. The body types, use it. You can practice it everywhere you go. If somebody walks in the office, I'm right away looking at the body type. And then they're going to tell me, is it a number 1 girl or a 2 girl? Does the body type match what they're telling me or not? And you will find that it matches about 80% of the time. Then you can start to explain what those differences might be about and what you might do to help that person orient to a different place. Because the genetic endowment is a very powerful force, and it continues to apply a force even if that child's adopted at birth and there's no knowledge of their parents. The genetic pattern is dominant. It can be influenced, obviously, in the first few years of life, but that underlying personality will find a way to manifest in that child's life later in life. So how do you help that child who doesn't know their parents, his actual biological parents? And when you notice the body type, it's going to help you do that. And you're going to end up with body types that are yin, body types that are yang. So we'll talk about the 6 body types from the father's family, the 6 body types from the mother's family, and we'll discuss the difference between a yin and yang body type. Let me show you some body types. So here are the basic 12 body types, now arranged in red, which is from the father's family, or yang, sometimes called the masculine type, or the ones in blue from the mother's side, yin sometimes. They all typically have thinner body types. So we'll describe these in basic detail. Now, remember that each one of these has a threefold sequence in how they progress through life, but let's just describe them in sets. Now, you'll see in the bottom of this, there are numbers. So this one over here is the 2 boy, 4 boy, 6 boy. That means they are aligned to the father's side of the family. 2 boy is father's father, 4 boy, the great-grandfather, father's father's father, and the number 6 boy, father's mother's father. These are the 3 masculine body types. And to distinguish them, they're really pretty easy to see in society. The 2 boy one, usually the energy is across the belly. And that's where they typically later in life have a more rounded belly than most. The 4 boy type, the energy is more at the chest. And they're the chesty, more broad-chested boys. Then the 6 boy is usually taller, but the energy is up at the shoulders. Now, these 3 different body types have obviously 3 different personality types, and you can look at the personality types in the birth order book that you can download on RAYID.com. And that downloads for free, so don't worry about that part of it. You can learn the personality and the body types, and you can learn the lesson that is common to that body type. Now, if a mother says, no, I have 3 boys and my 3rd one looks like this, then I know I have either the wrong information from them or something is really off in the family tree. So trust the body types. It really does work. So if you have 3 sisters or 3 women, you should have 3 distinctly different body types. The number 1 girl, the energy is usually at the hips, and she usually has mostly wider hips or slightly pear-shaped. I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings by calling their body pear-shaped, but number one girls are usually shorter, not short overall, but just typically shorter than the other girls, and a more solid body, but it's usually at the hips and maybe coming up to the waist. The 3 girl, 1-3 girl, she usually has the energy right at the solar plexus or chest. Her body is more usually like a straight barrel shaped body, boldness of the chest and solar plexus. Whereas the 5 girl body type, usually a little taller, and the energies in the shoulders, neck, and arms. If you get familiar with these body types, you can go somewhere in town or in the mall or wherever and see these body types. You can just see them walking around. Later on, you'll see interesting combinations when you have a number 1 girl who's actually 2 behind a boy. So that makes her 2 boy. So she has some 2 boy athleticism to her body, but she's also a 1 girl. Now you get combinations of body types. Yes, I know there are many combinations, but learn just the pristine ones first, and it will really help you in your work. And you'll find that there are typical symptoms or complaints, physically or emotionally, out of each one of these 6 different types of yang body types. Now, on the yin side, there's 3 boys. They're related to the 3 grandfathers from the mother's side of the family. 3 girls, and they're actually pretty easy to identify because the number 1 girl, the number 2 girl of the first one on that side, she usually has the thinnest body type. Usually it's a straight body, not much difference in the waist or hips. So it's just a narrow body type. Later on, you can look at insulin resistance and triglycerides, and you'll find that there's a yang blood type, and the most common problem that happens in yang bodies, most common problems that happen in yin bodies. But the 2 girl body type is usually pretty easy to identify. Then her 4 girl sister is usually similar to her, but a little taller. And you'll see it in the upper neck and the longer legs. And she usually has it also in the fingers. You can look at the hands, by the way, and do the body types. Number 6 girl is typically the tallest, but all 3 of them are slender in nature, and they have the corresponding personalities that are associated with 2 girl and 4 girl and 6 girl. So these are relatively easier to see. Now, if someone says, no, I'm a number 1 girl, and they have this body type, then there's only a couple of reasons that it would have this kind of body type. Because normally if you have a number 1 girl who has wider hips, more mesomorphic, more physical body, and she says she's a number 1, the only way that can happen is either there is a child missing in the lineage of the family tree and she's actually a 2 girl, or her mother was a 2 girl. So I usually say if somebody has a narrow body, what's the birth order of your mother? And so if the mother was a 4, it's possible. If the mother was a 2, it's more likely. So the number 1 girl takes on a lot of the body type of her mother and combines that with her father's mother. I know that's a lot to consider, how 2 girl takes on the issues from mother's mother, 1 girl takes on the issues from father's mother, and they oftentimes share body type combinations. So just learn the basics of 3 body types for women on the mother's side, 3 body types for the boys. Now, the interesting thing about the body type for the boys is it's the only place in the family tree I can find where it's not a progression taller. Over here, boys 2, 4, and 6, they get taller. Girls 1, 3, 5, they get taller. Girls 2, 4, 6, they get taller. But in this reason, for some reason, which I pondered for a long time, can't tell you I have an answer. 3-boy is usually the shortest of the 3 boys. 1 boy can be medium height and even a little taller at times than 3-boy. And then 5-boy is typically the tallest. Usually not as tall as the 6-boy, but similar or nearly that height. So here's the 3 different body types for the boys. Now, the typical personalities are associated with 5-boy, 3-boy, and 1-boy. So I like to identify that who's sitting down in front of me. If somebody comes in and they say, yes, I'm a number 1 son, and the body type matches that, and I do the diagram for a number 1 son. Remember, that was a diagram where I was doing the mother's family and the father's family, and you show how number 1 son is connected to mother's father's line, and usually he knows it, she knows it. Oh yes, he loves his grandfather, looks just like him, and he much more relates to mother's family, and mother's very dear about number 1 son. But sometimes number 3 son, which also comes from the mother's side of the family, has more of a antisocial nature, because a lot of 3-boy types, they have a desire not to be seen or discovered or controlled by others. So the 3-boy body type, if I have 2 brothers sitting there and I find out that they are number 1 and number 3, then this matches. I know that the 2-boy brother is not with them because he would have a 2-boy body type. So you would have 1-boy, 2-boy, 3-boy body types. And I know this is a lot to consider to gather in all at once, but just basically learn 3 girls, 3 boys in sets. Now later on, these sets are also lessons in life. So for example, if you have a 2-boy body type and you know you have now somebody who's a 2 behind a boy and he has a body type like that, then he's going to typically be involved in the use of fire. By that I mean emotional fire, anger, action, movement, purpose, passion. This is a 2-boy fire in the world. Now, this is also fire in the belly, fire in the heart, fire in the head. What I mean by this, fire in the belly is emotional fire toward achieving an action. Fire in the heart sometimes wants to be seen by other people, wants to unify friends, wants to have a group, wants to be a team. Fire in the head usually wants to lead everybody. So these are the 3 phases of fire in these 3 different body types. Now, these are also 3 major lessons in life. If 2-boy masters this lesson, he's going to get this lesson. Now, the interesting thing is about a 6-boy body type, his lesson happens to be then 1 and 3. Why is that? This is a sequence that always progresses. So for example, if you have a 1 girl, her lesson is 1 and 3 and 5. Home and community and global. 3 basic lessons for all number 1 girls. And they usually recognize it, though they might struggle with number 5 later in life and whether or not they want to do it. But then if you have a number 5 girl, her next lesson is number 2, then 3. Wow, how does that work? You have a number 5 girl whose interests are global. How does she learn the lesson of peace, which is a quality of number 2 girl? So 5 girl has to learn the lessons of 2 and 4. Now, to make it easy for you, if you want, you can take any birth order pattern that you're sure about, add 1. Yes. If you're a number 1 girl, add 1. You have to learn how to be a 2 girl. Yes. If you're a number 3 girl, you have to learn how to be a 4 girl. Yes. If you're a 5 girl, you have to learn how to be a 2 girl. Always just add 1 to the order. So if you're a 1 boy, you have to learn how to be a 2 boy. If you're a 3 boy, you have to learn how to be a 4 boy. I think I pointed to 2 on that, but this is 2 boy. So if you're a 1 boy, you have to learn 2. If you're a 3 boy, you have to learn 4. If you're a 5 boy, you have to learn 6. That's a pretty easy way to remember what the composite lesson is. And it all relates to those vectors I was showing you. It all relates to these lines of pathway. So the body type is on a long-term journey through a lifetime, and those are the lessons that they typically have to learn. So somebody has to learn how to do these while incorporating the ones on the opposite side. So in order to do all 3 of these, I need to learn all 3 of the other ones. It's not easy to say to a number 2 boy, oh, you're going to have to learn about peace. And then you're going to have to learn about truth. And then you're going to have to learn how to be alone and appreciate beauty. Not an easy thing. Or you could come back over here and say, yes, you have fire in the belly, you can make a lot of friends, and you can run the world. 2 boys like to hear that. Yes, they want to hear about the fire in the belly. They want to hear about fire going into the heart and building things and becoming successful and having many friends and becoming prosperous. Though, yes, they want to be leaders in the world. They want to be a 6 boy. But in order to do that, they have to learn the lessons of 1 boy, soft, feeling-oriented humility, eek. 3 boy, the ability to go into the 4 boy realm requires that they learn ethics and truth. Because if a 2 boy doesn't learn humility and ethics and truth, they use their fire to attack other people, burn down their own personal success, and they do the number 1 emotional use of energy for number 2 boy, which is blame others. Shoot, not an easy lesson. So all of these body types have corresponding lessons they start with, and they have a progression. And then they have symptoms, and they have organs and glands that trouble them the most. And so just by using the body types and becoming very familiar with the intricacies of how the body type works, I'll be willing to do a more thorough one on body types and break it down individually and show you the progress. But I'm trying to get you to be aware of jewels and flowers either go yang or yin. Now what that means is jewels, 95% of the time, they usually end up going toward the mother's side of the family. Flowers, 95% of the time, go to the father's side of the family. And then you're going to find there's typical symptoms when somebody is going over to the yang side of the family to learn a lesson or a different stage of life. They're going over to the yang side. They're going to have feelings of these 6 different parts. Feelings about family, feelings about community, feelings about global, personal anger, personal feelings, personal passion, difficulties or desire for friendship, wanting to lead. This causes basic activity, movement, inflammation, high blood pressure, stroke, heart attack. These are the probable symptoms of them going to the yang side. Very common. Inflammation in the joints, inflammation in the heart or the brain. So this is where you get the most yang-oriented diseases, sudden accidents, heart attack, stroke. This is typically on the yang side of the scale. So whenever you have those body types, you can prepare them for the responsibility by giving them supplements that cool the body down, or herbs, vitamins, vibrational medicines, whatever you want to use to cool this down, or you can help them learn how to incorporate the yin side of the family. Then there are yin diseases. Yin diseases are chronic, long-term diseases, like a cancer or a grief, depression patterns, or even schizophrenia is out this side. So many of the mental problems are on this side. Over here, they get aggressive and busy. Over here, they get escapism because they're trying to escape something from the father's family, or they want to go out of body, or they only want to do spirituality because they don't want to deal with responsibility. So after a while, you can look at the body type, look at the behavior, get the history, and it's not difficult to get an overall assessment. All of this before looking at the iris. So let me just show you an iris in a different way now that you've got both sides of this, and you see these different phases of body types. And oh, by the way, these different phases of body types will relate to different seasons of the year. This will be a spring and summer body type. This is an autumn and winter body type. So this is all the cycles and seasons function. But now let me show you going back to the irises for just a moment. Be right back. So these are the four basic constitutions of the iris. Yes, they break into other combos of stream, flower, and shaker, jewel, and so on. There's all kinds of combinations. There's almost infinite variation. But these are the four different constitutional types. And you'll find out that 95% of all jewels have a tendency to go right brain or inward, or into the yin side, or into the intellectual or etheric, or want to go out of body. Whereas the flower type has a tendency to go to the yang side, and they go into fire or action or community. They go into an emotional display into public. Jewels have a tendency to go into an inner seeking function, want to examine things. This is sometimes called sympathy and antipathy. And these other two are components that have a tendency to go different ways at different times. You have the stream-like function, which is mostly going to go to the yang side because what they like the most is safety and security. They like regularity, tradition, safety, and security, and things that don't change. They usually get that on the yang side. Shaker patterns, they usually go to the right brain, not always, but usually to the right brain because they want change, they want progress, they want to accelerate. They don't want to do things like they were in the past. There's a natural rebelliousness. Now, if you have the constitutional type, then you combine that with the body type. So if you have the body type and you have a flower and it's a two-boy body type, then you know that the emotional display of that person in a two-boy body type, you know, the body type is the one which has across the belly, more athletically, more physically driven. Now, the interesting thing is, if you have this eye structure, and it's a number 1 sun, and you know that number 1 sun has a tendency to be connected to mother's side of the family and mother's father, this is going to change how this iris composition displays itself. This is without looking at individual positions or sectors of the iris. This is just taking an emotional type and explaining it based on its birth order. So if you have a jewel type and it's a number 2 behind a boy, you're going to have a very interesting, very direct, athletic, mental, aggressive, because the 2-boy function will create the display now moving into action. But if this jewel type person is a 1-boy or a 3-boy or a 5-boy, one of the other 3 on that side, then their mental is going to go more into the yin state, more into the mind, more into examination on the 3-boy cases like science or astronomy, chemistry, or if it goes up into 5-boy function, it goes into spiritual phenomenon or artistic phenomenon. So the birth order will modify how these things are realized or guided. So that's how I use the composition of the iris in the body type or birth order explanation. You put all of that together, you have a pretty big responsibility to explain now how that progresses. And some of that progress is going to be related to the function about how to be able to use sectors of the iris, because I no longer use the positions like I used to. I use individual areas, yes, at times, but I have a tendency to go into sectors of the iris. And I'd like to show you a map of those sectors, and then we'll come back another time and do them more thoroughly, and we'll combine birth order with the iris constitution and the sectors. And then we'll get into, on the last lesson, we'll have what is the most useful therapeutic application for combining all of these different forms of information. Let me show you the sectors. Sectors. Now, I usually take no more than 10 seconds, sometimes 5 seconds to look at one iris. 5 seconds on the left eye, 5 seconds on the right eye. I just make some mental notes, and I do it primarily by sectors. By that I mean these are pie-shaped wedges in threes. Later on, yes, these numbers relate to the number of the birth order. And yes, this will be relating to 6-boy, 4-boy, 2-boy, 1 and 3 and 5. Yes, this is true. These will be used as numbers for other reasons, because these will also relate to, in the long run, chakra positions 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and 6. Yes, there is a way to be able to do that with the iris function. So I like to use sectors. And sometimes I'll do it as simple as looking at the top. I'll look at the top 2 sectors, and I'll usually do that one last. And the ones I do first, nearly all the time, lower lateral or outside, what I call the social dynamic area. The 2 and the 4 will show you how they relate to other people, because the 2 and the 4 is about relating to other people. We could talk about that for a long time, but the lateral lower functions are social manifestation functions. Lower medial functions, much harder to get confirmation of, and they're oftentimes related to childhood, and their inner topographies. 1 and 3 are not easy to get confirmation, so I don't go to them right away. I will explain them as I going around the iris, but they're generally oriented. I just use these sectors. And later on, yes, this will be related to grandfather or grandmother number 2, 4, and 6. And they're also going to be related to the energies running up the body and down the body. And you're going to find that your use of ascending and descending flows with this. I know this is a lot of information, but most of you have done a lot of time with the iris, body types. You've looked at nutrition. You've looked at herbs and supplements. You've spent a lot of time getting to know people. I'm just trying to add to your knowledge about what are you going to do with all this information. Where does this actually lead? How do we use this? So I'd like to come back at another time and give you an opportunity to see how I combine it. And at the very last session in this sequence of IIPA sessions, I'd like to introduce you to how I believe it's possible to mobilize all 6 of these in a flowing sequence. And yes, I know there's herbs, supplements, vitamins, glands, organs, and body systems, and all of this, but they're primarily linked through one fluid system. And I'd like to show it to you, and that to me is cycles and seasons. I'd like to show you how each part of this is related to a different season of the year, and how it's linked into the family tree, and how there are symptoms and law of attraction events that are likely to occur at different ages. Then I'd like to show you the age of 1 through 64 and how these patterns flow. And I hope by then you might be interested in stepping into an experiment that I'm currently involved in about how to acknowledge each one of these locations in the family tree, deal with the corresponding feeling, move on to another one, and then cycle through this throughout the day, throughout the season, throughout the year, while doing all the other things you do. Sure, you have plenty of time, right? It shouldn't take you more than 8 to 10 minutes in a day until it becomes a lifestyle. But that's enough for today. You had a lot. Go out and take a look at the body types and all their variations. Yes, you can come up with questions if you want, and we can talk about why 40% of Americans are obese and so on. We can talk about all the exceptions to the rules. We haven't even really talked about rings yet in the iris. We did it on an audible level class one time, but we'll see. We'll get to it again if we can. All right. Thank you for your interest and your long-term support. Bye for now.